This is Israel at War. I'm Steve Conover, Executive Director of the Friends of Israel Gospel Ministry. We're in unprecedented times. Last night, Israel conducted a multi-targeted attack deep in Iran. Part of what seems to be just the start of a large-scale, long-term attack called Operation Rising Lion. Our Vice President of North American Ministries and the host of the Friends of Israel Today radio program, Chris Katulka, he's here to talk about it. Welcome, Chris.
Steve, thanks for having me.
Chris, as most of our viewers will know, Israel attacked Iran last night at several locations. They attacked leadership, they attacked nuclear facilities, they also attacked Iran's ability to respond. What do we know now?
Yeah, there's a couple points that I want to make sure that we get across. Number one, you had already mentioned this earlier, but it's Operation Rising Lion, which was something that is a large-scale attack on what's going on in Iran. So we're not just targeting Tehran. Israel's not just targeting Tehran. They're looking at the entire nuclear infrastructure. That's everything from leadership to actual facilities. And these are spread all throughout the country of Iran, too. So when Israel goes into attack, we're not just going to Tehran. We're evaluating all of the resources, all of the intelligence that gives Israel the understanding of where these prime targets are. And again, that's everything from the actual sites where they're enriching uranium to the scientists that are leading the uranium enrichment to the IRGC leaders. That's the Islamic Revolution, Iranian Revolutionary Guard. Those leaders that are helping push this forward. And so Israel really struck high-value Iranian targets. The other thing was, the big picture was the destruction of the air defense systems that were put in place. And I want to talk about that a little bit later, about how MSAD acted in Israel, but really Israel paved the way for this attack to take place with 200 various jets coming in to take out these strategic locations. So really dismantling a lot of radars and surface-to-air battery installations all across Iran. And finally, what happened as a result, the big thing so far that what we've seen is that Israel went into protection mode once they attacked. They notified everybody in Israel that that was happening. They went into protection mode, and there was an Iranian response with about 100 drones or so in retaliation, but all of them were shot down. So that's kind of where we stand, big picture right now with Iran, and I think Israel has set themselves up in a good position to make sure that they're crippling not only the nuclear infrastructure that Iran's been building, but even more importantly, crippling the response that they can give as well.
For years, we've heard talks about Israel having to do something big. I mean, it's been decades, really, where this has been on the table. Why did it happen now?
You know, there's a lot of pieces in place here, and I don't want to go on too long of a journey, but you know, a lot of it goes back to the understanding, even into 2015. Everybody knew that Iran could not become a nuclear power. Well, the Obama administration, in conjunction with the European Union and the United Nations, set up the Iran deal. That's what we called it, the Iran deal. Technically, it's called the JCPOA. And that was designed to bring Iran into basically bilateral relationships with a lot of the countries that have pushed Iran away. Trying to bring Iran into the fold, and in doing so, saying, if you want to be a part of what we're doing in trade negotiations and being a part of the global world, then we want you to stop enriching uranium to the capacity of a nuclear weapon. Well, that happened. The Iran deal was signed, but again, Iran continued to abuse the system, and they continued to enrich, and there were questions as to whether or not they were even following the rules, or we couldn't have access to certain sites to see if the uranium enrichment had stopped. But we all just kind of pretended and kept moving forward until the Trump administration finally pulled the plug on the Iran deal. And when the Trump administration did that, that didn't mean that the JCPOA died. It actually just meant that Iran turned its focus to the European countries, all the while still enriching their uranium. Finally, they were trying to pull themselves out completely. The Biden administration tried to reenact that engagement again with the JCPOA and the Iran deal. Remember, they were even unleashing funds to the tune, I think, of $6 billion to Iran. And what ends up happening is not long after that, October 7th happened. Now, October 7th changes everything, because now, with October 7th, Israel goes on the offense to suffocate Hamas and to destroy Hamas and Hezbollah. So now you've destroyed Hezbollah, you've destroyed Hamas, Israel. In the meantime, the Assad regime falls, which destroys the bridge, the land bridge between Iran and Hezbollah and Hamas, which really dismantles a lot of the influence that Iran was able to have surrounding Israel, and weakens Iran as well. So this not only do you have the situation of nuclear enrichment going on in Iran, but you also have Iran's influence in the Middle East being weakened by Israel's offensive attack. And so there's so many pieces that are being put into place where Israel has actually just, in less than a year and a half, was able to push back its enemies in the north and in the south, those proxies that Iran uses, in order to strengthen their foothold in the region. And then at the same time, Iran lost that connection, which kind of made Iran weaker. Tehran has been becoming more and more weak. So this moment, this attack that happened for several reasons. One being that Iran was in the late stages of developing a nuclear weapon. But on top of that, Iran's very weak right now. The influence that they had with Hezbollah and those proxy militias of Hezbollah and Hamas and even the Houthis have weakened them because Israel has shown their strength. And if you're going to attack, you had said the big one, if you're going to attack, now's the time. You have an administration in the West through the Trump administration that's probably not going to turn away from what's, or condemn so much, maybe as past administrations might have done. You've got a weakened Iran, and at the same time, you've got a strengthened Israel on a mission to destroy the enemies that are constantly trying to destroy them. And so I think this was the big moment. This was the big time.
And something of this complexity, this wasn't figured out yesterday. It's safe to assume that this has been planned for a while.
Yeah, that's why I want to talk about the MSAD situation too, because we're getting more intel that's coming out about what the MSAD was doing in preparation. It kind of reminds me of, remember the Hezbollah beepers that exploded and targeted those specific Hezbollah agents, those terrorists, I mean. Very specific. Each beeper would blow up and would let you know that was a Hezbollah terrorist. So very targeted attack, but that didn't happen over the course of a week. Israel didn't put that together in a couple days. That's something that was developing over several months and years with Israel. The same could be said for this particular attack. Mossad had developed a covert sabotage operation inside Iran. So that means their presence is inside Iran. There's even video footage that we see of Israelis in Iran using special technology to suppress the response systems that would have launched rockets and or provided information to the Iranians about the Israeli jets that were coming in. And so the Mossad agents were able to smuggle and deploy explosive drones across Iran several months before the attack. And these drones were actually activated in sync with the airstrike to neutralize missile launchers and defense systems as well near Tehran. So Mossad was already at work, and one report I said this is something that's been in the work for years. So the groundwork was laid. It was just the right opportunity. The same could be said for the Hezbollah beepers that went off. This was something that was ready for a very long time, but it just took the right leader to say, now's the time to act. So Benjamin Netanyahu, since October 7th, the prime minister of Israel, has been on the offensive, not the defensive, on the offensive since October 7th to make sure that Israel's enemies, specifically Iran and its proxies, know that they are no longer going to wait. They're not going to wait for permission to respond. When they see the threat happen, they will be responding.
My understanding is that it takes the drones that Iran has launched against Israel about 8 hours to get there, but the ballistic missiles, which number I think about 2,000, those are the real threats. So having that response incapacitated was really a life-preserving measure.
100%. And those ballistic missiles that they launch from Tehran can carry a missile payload, a payload of 1,000 pounds. And so those ballistic missiles are ready to be connected to whatever nuclear weapon Iran is looking to develop. You know, another thing to note too, Steve, that we were talking about before we got started was why Israel decided to act now. And with the intelligence that they were coming up with, they knew they only had a few weeks to respond before Iran was able to develop 10 to 16 nuclear weapons. Their enrichment was at 60%. Now, you only need, to enrich uranium, you only need 3 to 5% enrichment in order to have nuclear power for electricity, for your neighborhoods and things like that. They're well into 60%. And once you and I were talking about this, once you get to 60%, it's only a few days before you get to full enrichment at 90% plus. And so Israel knew they only had a few weeks left before they had the capacity to build, with the right enrichment, to build that nuclear weapon. And they already had the infrastructure set up to deliver that payload to Israel as well.
I want to take a moment to consider the fact that we have Friends of Israel workers in Israel. We have Friends of Israel volunteers. FOI family is in Israel right now as we speak. We have friends in Israel, Jewish friends in Israel. Israel's in a state of emergency. What does it mean today for them, this day after this attack?
You know, I can't speak for the Israelis that are on the ground. I'm sure a lot of them woke up concerned about what would happen. You know, when you hit the beehive, that's when the bees start to swarm, and that's when you feel the great. You have to deal with this beehive, but the moment that you hit it, that's when all the bees come out and begin to attack. So I'm sure that feeling of uncertainty is real in the life of Israelis, and we have family, Friends of Israel family that are serving in Israel, in Jerusalem, and suburbs of Tel Aviv. In strategic locations of Israel. So I'm sure there's a heightened alert for what's going on over there. Even so, we have volunteers from the United States and Canada, young adults that just landed the day that Israel launched its preemptive attack against Iran. So they're hunkered down right now with nowhere to go. They just landed, ready to do volunteer work in Israel. So, right now we're really praying for wisdom, not only wisdom for the Israeli leadership on how to move forward after this attack, and what are the results of the attack on Iran, but also the wisdom for our teams on the ground on how they can, number one, best minister to the Israelis around them, and for our volunteers that had just arrived, the wisdom on how to be safe in Israel during this time, and how to use these moments to be a light of the Messiah, Jesus, to our Jewish friends. And so we're praying for wisdom from above for these moments.
Historically, Iran hasn't always responded immediately to these kinds of attacks. So what can we expect Iran to do now, if we could forecast that into the future?
That's a tough one. I think Iran is in a very weak position in the Middle East today. So their response will be an interesting one to see. We do know that they plan to respond to Israel. So what that looks like, I'm not quite sure. But again, I do think that Iran is in a weaker position than they were prior to October 7th. Like I said, they no longer have the proxies that they can count on to be that locale, that locational terror to Israel. Now they have to respond from a distance. Which will always put them at a greater disadvantage. So I don't know exactly how they'll respond. They certainly don't have the technology and resources that Israel has when it comes to military response, as you could see already with what happened in Tehran and other areas of Iran. But I don't know exactly how they'll respond to it, but I do think that they are weak. They are much weaker than they were prior to October 7th. So whatever they can dish out to Israel certainly wouldn't be what it would have been prior to October 7th. That's why I believe Israel really used this big moment, as you had talked about, to capitalize on destroying these uranium sites, these IRGC leaders, and also the scientists that were helping push this nuclear agenda along.
You mentioned the proxies. I think in the past we would have expected them to, if nothing else, launch from Lebanon or from inside Gaza, whether it's Hamas or Hezbollah up in the north, and we haven't seen that to this point.
That's right. And that's primarily because Israel has taken care of a lot of the military infrastructure of Hamas and Hezbollah in the north. But that also raises a really important thing for individuals to see, the influence that Iran had surrounding Israel. Iran still has its influence. I'm not trying to say it doesn't. Its major proxies were Hamas and Hezbollah. But Hamas still has an influence in Palestinian territories, in Judea and Samaria. They are gaining an influence in Jordan. They're gaining an influence in Iraq as well. So it doesn't mean that they're completely shrinking back, but those locations where they had a strategic military militia has been pretty much wiped out. And so that puts Israel in a great spot to stop thinking just about this part of their land, of their country, but how are we going to ultimately get rid of the funder, the one providing the purpose and reason behind attacking Israel? That's Iran. So attacking really the heart of all of the terrorism that's happening throughout the Middle East. And I'll add this too. What will be the thing to see is how other Middle Eastern countries respond to what Israel did. Remember, a lot of these countries have partnered with Israel, the Middle Eastern countries, since the Abraham Accords, and even before that have partnered with Israel, like Saudi Arabia, like Bahrain, and the UAE. They've partnered in response to Iran. You know, when the Obama administration put forward the Iran deal, it's really fascinating that it actually created a strategic alliance between Saudis and Israelis in defense of Iran's nuclear ambition. They're the ones that live in the neighborhood. They're saying this deal's not going to work. We know Iran. So it will be interesting to see how the partners of Israel in the Abraham Accords and the Saudis look at what's going on and what Israel did and how they respond to the situation as well. So just kind of trying to do some, seeing into the future about how those particular countries will either come to Israel's aid, support them in their endeavors, or stay silent. It'll be very interesting to see.
Last night I had this thought that, well, Israel just made the Middle East a little safer. Right. After those attacks. But what I don't want to be lost in this, and this is a major prayer concern for our viewers and for us here at the Friends of Israel, to not forget that after the October attacks in 2023, we saw a sharp increase in anti-Semitism around the world. So we need to be praying that those that might take this out on Jewish people around the world, we need to be praying for them.
100%. And prayer is something that we need to continue to pray. Psalm 122:6 to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. But can I add one more thing too? There's two mantras in the Middle East that that's what's going through my head since Israel attacked Iran. There's two mantras, and they are the first coming from Iran, which is death to Israel. We've heard that for a long time, Steve. Death to Israel. They've been screaming death to Israel for a long time. And it's almost as if the world turns a blind eye to another country that's trying to get a nuclear weapon and build its military infrastructure and its influences through its proxies. They almost kind of go, death to Israel, we've heard it. And then death to America, us. They're the little Satan, we're the big Satan. The other mantra on the other side comes from a tiny little country called Israel. And you can hear it very loud, and it's getting louder and louder and louder in the Middle East. And that is Am Yisrael Chai, the people of Israel live. Think about these two mantras that are opposite each other. One is screaming for death to Israel, and the other is saying, no, the people of Israel live. And you're hearing that chant, that mantra grow louder and louder as Israel moves from the defense to the offense. The world, Steve, to me, the world has constantly put Israel in the place of defense. Even their military is called the Israel Defense Forces. It's defense. You're constantly on the state of defense. But the reality is that Israel has taken what's happened in October 7th has forced them into a posture of offense. And that is the reason why you're hearing louder and louder and louder the mantra, the statement, Am Yisrael Chai, the people of Israel live. And the reason I support that as a Bible-believing Christian is because it's biblical. In Ezekiel chapter 37, after the dry bones come back together, God actually gives an answer to this prophecy. And he says, after this, the dead bones come back to life and form a man, and this entire group of people, all this death comes back to life. He says to Ezekiel, Son of man, these bones are the people of Israel. And now the people of Israel went from dead bones to life. The people, Am Yisrael Chai, the people of Israel live. It's biblical. And what's fascinating is right after Ezekiel chapter 37, you have Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39, which is the battle of Gog and Magog, which we see a regional battle that takes place in the future that involves countries like Persia, which is modern-day Iran, and other countries like Russia as well. And so it's fascinating that as the people of Israel live, there again becomes this regional tension that takes place over the land. There's a lot of disagreement on how all that plays out in the future, but I can't help but think of these two mantras that are screaming out loud in the Middle East and around the world. Death to Israel from Iran, and the people of Israel live. Am Yisrael Chai in Israel. And I believe Am Yisrael Chai is growing louder and louder and louder as Israel goes on the offense against their enemies.
Chris, you hit on a critical point. There are historical reasons to support the modern state of Israel, political reasons to support the modern state of Israel, but there are biblical reasons. There's something bigger happening here that is on a spiritual level.
That's right. The spiritual level is seeing that God's not through with Israel. And I think a lot of times when we think about Israel in the Bible, it's hard for a Christian to go, well, what does Israel have to do with me? And I think the Apostle Paul handles that question so well in Romans chapter 11, when he talks about the fact that the church, believers in Jesus, should not be arrogant or boastful against Israel and the Jewish people. And the Apostle Paul says, do you know why? Because you are not the roots. You know, if you're this flourishing tree, you're not the roots of the tree. The roots of the tree are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the church stands on those roots. You don't have a Messiah, Jesus. You don't have the scriptures that we read apart from the promises that God made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that are eternal promises. So spiritually, Satan's going to do everything that he possibly can to deceive the world that the Jewish people and Israel don't matter, that they're the obstacle to the redemption that could ultimately come, when really it's the flip side. It's the knowledge through the scriptures that the Israel and the Jewish people, they're not the obstacle to global redemption. They are the pathway to global redemption. And so there is a constant, we see what's going on in front of us through the lens of media, through the lens of what we see in front of us. That's the physical. Behind the scenes is the spiritual, where Satan is constantly working to develop a narrative that God's through with his people. And the scriptures show us over and over again, may it never be.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Chris. My thanks to Chris Katulka for joining us today. You know, as Christians, we're called to love who and what God loves. The Bible tells us in Zechariah chapter 2, verse 8, that the Jewish people are the apple of his eye. God loves the Jewish people, and he put his name in Jerusalem. You know, God's not surprised by any of this. He's sovereign. His will be accomplished, and that is a wonderful comfort to us as Christians. So what can you do? Well, first, I'd ask that you pray for Israel and the Jewish people, especially in these critical hours. Second, take a bold stand by showing your unwavering support. Let the Jewish people know they are not alone in this world. And finally, you can give. Through our Stand with Israel Fund, you can support Israel in a tangible way in this critical hour. Visit foi.org/standwithisrael to give today. We'll continue to keep you informed, so be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay up to date with breaking news and the work of the Friends of Israel Gospel Ministry.